So hello and welcome to the 2018 Virtual and Augmented Reality Symposium, sponsored by the Office of the Vice President for Research, Morgan Library, and HP. Now, unfortunately, the Vice President for Research couldn't be here today, and as many of you know, he is one of the major proponents of VR here on campus. He's in Berlin right now at a GATE Symposium. But he did want to share some words with us. He sent a note, and I'd like to ask Lauren if she could to come up and share his note with us.
Hi, everyone. I'm Lauren Clam. I work for the Office of the Vice President for Research with Alan Rudolph. And like David said, Alan is over in Berlin right now. He sends his regrets that he can't be here. But he was invited to be a part of the Gates Foundation Solve-a-thon, which is a virtual reality event that's very similar to our Create-a-thon that we have going on later today. And he was invited to speak and be a part of that event because of our Create-a-thon. And we just wanted to share that with you because it's an exciting opportunity. And we, in the Office of the Vice President for Research, really think that VR is the future of research and communication. And we hope you enjoy the event today and learn a little bit more about VR and where it will take us. Thanks.
Thanks. So you have to know Alan is going to come back from this conference, strap in. He's going to have lots of things he wants to share with people. That is guaranteed. So this is the first event in our RAM Reality Weekend. After today's symposium, we'll kick off the HP Create-a-thon with 50 students spending 48 hours developing virtual and augmented reality experiences. And you can stop by the Morgan Library lobby on Monday to see the winning products. And I think certainly we anticipate the competition will be stiff. So that's my avatar right there. There's a lot happening on campus. So when I interviewed, I've only been here for 2 months. And when I interviewed for the job, no one mentioned virtual reality to me. There was no mention of it during the interview process. But I do have a background in virtual reality, and I was delighted to come on campus and find so many ongoing projects in VR ongoing. And to just run through a few of them here. So and Laura will be talking a little bit more about the Nancy Richardson Design Center and the VR work going on there. There's also work going on in storytelling, digital storytelling. We'll hear a little bit more about that. We also have the B Sharp program that's taking Alzheimer's patients into real-time experiences of music that's proving to be quite therapeutic. And one of the graduates of the Create-a-thon, the hackathon from a few years ago, is Todd Clapp's human anatomy virtual reality models. And Todd is actually in Japan this week and next week, demonstrating his model to some Japanese physicians. It's really, if you haven't had a chance to experience Todd's work, it's definitely worth finding out a little bit more about. Geology group is also very active in VR studies. The CSU Global is creating a geology module in collaboration with the VR initiative of the OVPR. And the geology department itself has a number of VR initiatives ongoing that are really quite exciting. I should let you know that the library VR studio is open and available to you to borrow equipment from for your own VR projects. If you have any VR projects that you're interested in working on, and in addition, the OVPR's VR initiative Also has a variety of equipment available for general use. You can arrange to visit that space. It's in Johnson Hall. You can arrange to visit that space anytime between 9 and 5 p.m. Weekdays, although official office hours run from 10 to noon. But certainly Max Mayer in the office is happy to make himself available to your needs. So we're going to kick off the symposium and ask our VPR student fellows to introduce speakers. AJ, Jimmy K, and Maybelline are going to be our MCs. So I think AJ is up first to introduce Kaden.
Hello everyone, my name is AJ Brown. I'm a VPR fellow with the College of Agricultural Sciences, so this is a really cool experience for me today. Virtual reality is a little out of my reality, so it's my pleasure today to introduce Mr. Kaden Strand. He's a CEO of Blue Penguin, and he is an alumni of CSU pretty recently actually, and his business is a custom solutions company that blends software engineering and creative design to solve practical problems with the perceptual power of visual environments. Blue Penguin creates customized and interactive immersive content for emerging virtual reality platforms, including Oculus Rift, HTC Vive, and Microsoft HoloLens. Previously, Kaden was also the virtual reality initiative project lead for the Office of the Vice President of Research for Colorado State. Without further ado, Mr. Kaden Strand. Thank you. So,
I'm Kaden. Thanks for coming out today. I had the pleasure of being involved in the first symposium and Create-a-thon, that CSU put on in virtual reality. So, as AJ mentioned, my company is in virtual reality software development, and I'd like to share some about that process, that journey of enabling VR creation for everybody. To start with, my question is, what does it mean to create a reality? And I think this is pretty different than really anything that's come before it with regard to software or written word. There's this perspective you can think of with software engineering and think, hey, this is like computer graphics, this is like a video game. But there's the other perspective, which is really that you are an actor in a virtual environment, that you have presence there, and in the very least, you're the camera, but sometimes you're even more, and you can reach out and affect the world that you're in. So you're interacting with something, and so through that lens, you're not just creating software, you're creating your own memories and your own situations that will be lived experience. And so that really changes the perspective of what's possible here. So sometimes, when you look at the question of what's the point of having something in virtual or augmented reality versus on a regular two-dimensional screen, you kind of have a balance of, hey, well, it looks the same on 2D, I'm not going to put on the headset, it's not going to make any difference. And in my experience, I think it's a very large difference, and it's kind of a journey trying to understand where exactly that difference is. So it's a fundamentally new experience, and it's transitioning very quickly from kind of a passive thing where you see 360 videos sometimes to getting into fully featured software that is engaging with the very thoughts, the very core ideas that you want to learn more about. So Blue Penguin as an organization helps others to kind of look through this journey and understand what it is that will be most impactful in virtual reality. So before I get into that, actually I'm gonna go back to it. So the first year at the Create-a-thon, I want to share a success story from the Human Anatomy department. So this was a team that was one biomedical science student and two computer science students. And they came into the hackathon and said, well, how do we share a specific piece of content in a new way? How do we look at the discipline of neuroanatomy, where you have 3D circuitry in the brain, and try to teach this in a new way? So there was one graduate student, Brendan Garb, who was extremely familiar with this task, and he'd been teaching it in courses. And then there were 2 computer science students that were not familiar with it at all. And over the weekend, they came up with a fully interactive neural circuitry demo that you could actually engage with and reach in and block out some circuits and see the effect on the neural pathways. And what was interesting about this was actually that the computer science students that had no experience with this, once they got into it and once they were familiar with what they were trying to build and then had built it, Brendan was asking questions to them and seeing if they understood the circuitry, and they say, oh yeah, we were right there, and you could just block that off, and that's what happens. And Brendan kind of marveled, because he looked at this process and knew that other students who had been consuming this content in a 2-dimensional fashion were taking months to learn this, and these other students were just kind of picking it up because they were there and engaging, and it was very real to them. So that project actually grew into what David mentioned with the CSU Human Anatomy VR, which has lately, the reason they're in Japan right now is actually looking at 4-dimensional magnetic encephalogram models of how the brain currents actually flow through time, and you can actually get in there and see that in 3D and with movement, which is something I was helping them out with the 4D brain activity. But here's a quick shot of what they're doing with CT scans and 3-dimensional volume models here with a lung. And they can actually interact with this data very flexibly. They can look at the transfer functions that they want to apply. And with the brain, this is kind of the culmination of what they envisioned a couple of years ago. They're able to go into the brain and see how the circuits are connected, all in 3D, all in VR. And then they have some other software that's working on building in those interactive layers to be able to cut off parts of it and see the effects. They have one excellent demo in optical nerve relationships. So I'm going to back up really quick to say, so Blue Penguin is a CSU alumni-owned software company. We're in Fort Collins, and we consult on these types of projects with companies and with the university to engage in the story of what is your data and what are you looking at, and how do you practically apply virtual reality to your business and your research and your thoughts, ultimately. So we did a project for Sanofi Pasteur, a leading therapeutic vaccine developer in the world, exploring how global data visualization and molecular data visualization, as well as therapeutic effects, could be applied in VR, as well as some architecture work with Trilogy Partners. I brought this one because it was one of the first demos of the HP ZVR backpack that was in public. So one of the challenges right now in VR is that the systems are usually tethered with a cord to a computer, and you kind of have a system that you can play with, but you might not be able to walk around, and HP's provided a solution that helps with this. So we were able to show at the Breckenridge Film Festival a demo of a high-end home that you could walk around and interact with, and you weren't constrained by the wires because you had this nice backpack. So I'll start with one of the projects that's getting started and engaging multiple areas at CSU is the research team funded by the research office called Enriched Environments for the Healthy Aging Brain. And across multiple disciplines, we have a research team, Laura Malinin will be able to share more about this as well, where the goal is to develop social, environmental, and non-drug-based, but activity-based interventions that can be applied to elderly populations to impact health, cognitive, physical, and social health. And there are existing programs in equine therapy, in music, in dance therapy, in art interventions. And what we're looking at to continue and expand in a new direction is how do these interact with virtual reality? Can you either come up with a new virtual reality intervention that can accomplish some of these social and health outcomes that we've seen successfully in other interventions through VR, or can we augment or make an assistive virtual or augmented experience that will increase the efficacy of one or more of these types of programs. So over there on the left in the picture, we've, as part of this, taken 3D 360 video, immersive video of the B Sharp program, which is a program where patients and their caregivers with Alzheimer's will come and experience the Fort Collins Symphony. And it's not just the symphony piece, it's actually getting into conversations and social interactions before the symphony and kind of telling a story of taking part in a larger music intervention. And this is important to look at because in Fort Collins, we're lucky with the type of access we have with the Fort Collins Symphony, but in rural and other populations, it's much more challenging to kind of get up and out there into these types of environments. So we're looking at this as an area that possibly we can use VR as a method to have kind of this social impact. Some more details on this. Last May, were able to take some of this recording from the symphony and from the social rooms, and we're going to be rolling this out into a test case pretty soon on the Oculus Go device, which is fairly new, but it is a standalone headset that'll be nice to be able to kind of hand out to people, and they can kind of put it on and work with it without having to get set up with a big computer. And then we're going to be comparing this with other types of applications on the Oculus Go, both purely virtual environments and other 360 videos. We're also doing a project with multiple departments again in healthy and walkable spaces. So this is actually in collaboration with the City of Fort Collins Planning Office to take a section of Old Town Fort Collins and then bring it into a virtual environment, again with the backpack computer that you can walk around, and we'll be examining what the outcomes will be in different levels of detail environments. If you have kind of a very rough environment, very basic, versus a nicely fleshed out area with trees and sounds and healthy environments, will you be more likely to walk around and find food, find things without kind of getting in your car and leaving. So this will be kind of an upcoming experiment too. And then I want to share, kind of transition into some ideas about where VR is going and solving some of the challenges. So a lot of time in VR, you have a situation where you have some kind of data, and maybe you're a scientist, maybe you're an individual just that wants to see something in VR. And the current story says, well, you need to go learn about VR and invest in platforms and learn about how to code and bring this in with a software engineering gaming pipeline. I think that's going to change fairly rapidly. Already we're seeing that with Adobe products and 360 video and others that make it easier for you to create content yourself. But in the areas that I've been working in with trying to visualize certain types of data or quickly prototype or iterate on a process, I think the web will actually provide an interesting solution, and that is you can actually access 3D environments directly through the web browser by navigating to a URL. So the idea here to lay the scene is, what if you had a virtual reality headset, maybe that's the Oculus Go, maybe that's the HTC Vive, and you simply type in a URL and go to a web page, and then you can actually enter in 3D and VR. And then if that's possible, you can capitalize on many of the existing paradigms that work well for the web, such as software as a service, where you're connecting into some service that's maintained elsewhere and then is updated, and you just kind of jump in. And so this actually has really practical implications for how certain types of work are done in VR. And the biggest split is that not everything needs to be done with a full-on game engine where you are trying to build the next, big game, World of Warcraft or something, or Skyrim, where the gaming environment needs to be many, many gigabytes. Instead, it's more, how do you have this piecemeal? I need to see some data. I need to collaborate with somebody. Let's just go to a URL and share. So works like this. You can just go to a URL, And then if you're on a regular device, such as a 2D tablet or a PC, you can click and drag and move around, and you kind of have this magic window into the VR environment. But if you have a VR headset, then you can click a button and then immerse yourself in that environment. So some of the areas that this is going to be useful to start is 360 video. So one of the challenges in 360 video, if you're familiar with creating the video frames, is that you actually pack a homogenized amount of pixels into your frame. So if you have a 4K video, you're going to have a 4K video throughout your frame. And when you stretch that around your face, it gets kind of blurry. So if you want to have fine detail text, if you want to have pictures, if you want to have an environment and then have the computer, show you text or annotations or other videos on top of it, the current solution is to use Adobe Premiere and then bring in your information and composite out a video. But that gives you, as a result, kind of a spread of pixels. So the other way is to come into a game engine, and you actually can place the 3D objects inside, and they'll be rastered in a way that is much higher resolution. So this is kind of an image of that, but this is directly through the web. So the Energy Institute picture and the engine text will both show up very clear in your headset, because this is actually kind of a game environment that's running in the web. But you can share this as a link, just like a YouTube video, and pop it up and actually see in really high resolution text and finer details. So it's a newer way to interact with 360 video that can be easily updated and distributed. Another one is personal web pages. When I say kind of everybody can be a creator, I really do mean there are areas that are maybe perceived as non-technical that end up having some technical component. Many painters and artists have online portfolios. And so one of them, there's actually a CSU graduate as well, Matthew McHugh, who's a Fort Collins artist, and he's had some shows around here. And I worked with him to create a web VR accessible site where he could display his work at full scale. And his work is very large. It'll be 4x3 pictures and paintings, and it's a very different perceptual experience to stand in front of one of those paintings than it is to see it on a feed. So right now you see a lot of art or pictures that come through Facebook feed, perhaps, and you can kind of gloss over them because you're not really getting a sense of that scale. And scale is one of those important things that you see in VR. So this is something that you can navigate to a URL. You can experience his full gallery in a virtual environment and really perceive what it is to be standing next to his work. So I'll touch on this without getting into the tech details, but the other idea here is that you can compose things. So if you think about if you're writing a blog or coming up with a website, you're really mixing a lot of technologies that you might not even really think about. You might be writing a piece and you have text, and then you insert a YouTube video, and then maybe you have some kind of interactive component or put in a Google Maps embeddable component, and suddenly you're telling a very specific data-driven story that's accessible to people to understand, and it is using many different technologies, many different platforms all at once. And so that's coming to virtual reality as well, in contrast to coming out with a specific program in virtual reality that does everything you need it to do. Very soon we'll have components that are kind of mix and match, that somebody can develop something like a 3D mapping component that they might not, realize what it could be used for in your scenario, but you can go ahead and make those changes. So one of these is, we did a project just to prototype with the vet anatomy here at CSU. They take very fine detail scans of vet anatomy. So that's a kind of ugly looking feline limb. And you can introduce this idea of software as a service, where if you're a student and you need to see that particular limb, and it's better to see it at some sort of scale and in 3D, you can pull just that limb and see what it is, and then you can mark it up and annotate it. And that type of thing can happen directly in VR on whichever device you happen to be in. Second example is the geological visualization that I just mentioned. where you can have terrain components that pop up, and then you can combine into the scene however you would like. So this again is a web example where I've added a simple terrain component, but then introduced a new method of scaling and interaction. And the author of the terrain component didn't envision this particular use case of being able to fly in. So I'll show a quick scene of this where with the hand controllers I can change the scale. So now you can actually go and feel like you're right up on top of this mountain, or zoom out so that you have a better sense of kind of the global understanding. Then you have these little labels here, which again are custom, that are not connected directly to the model. And then another good example of this is chemical visualization. If you think of chemical, especially biochemical visualization, an example of one of the leading repositories of this type of data is the Protein Data Bank, which UCSD maintains. And it has several 100,000 molecular models that scientists around the world have used or have donated. But you don't need to use all of them at one time. So it'd be kind of absurd to think about, okay, I'm going to download this entire database, like downloading all of Wikipedia, just to be able to see the type of molecule that I want. So this is an example, again, where we've actually open sourced a way to bring these components into the web directly, where you can search for your model as you would if you're a scientist in this area, and look at the different structures and coloring data and formats that are available to see the molecular data. So this is the same. This example here is the same core data, which is molecular representation of an antibody, and it's shown with different spatial and structural representations. So these can be kind of added to a scene to describe, hey, we want to talk about DNA, we can make annotations. So here's a little quick video of that, where if you bring in this DNA molecule, which is directly based off of the scientific data involved, then you can annotate with a completely different component, which is a chemical, which is a painting, 3D painting component like Tilt Brush or Oculus's Quill. And so here, a student or an instructor could kind of guide, well, here's this raw format. Let's kind of trace out the semantics involved about understanding what DNA looks like. So we get to, essentially, this is what I believe will be coming to VR very shortly, where your data processing can happen wherever. It might happen locally on your device. It might happen in the cloud. But then, like many other areas, it's going to come through a web interface and build on existing web technologies and be mixed with them. If you have a payment scheme that's in the web, you can combine it in the web very easily. And then your immersive view is going to be separate from that. So regardless of your device, you can pick up your headset, go to a URL, and then you're interacting with your kind of data. That's all. Thank you.